everyone, welcome to my channel. And before we actually practice the Servlet Listener using code, we will briefly introduce what APIs are available inside the Jakarta Servlet Listener. Okay, because it's not only one interface. We have so many. Here I categorized using event objects and the listener interfaces. Okay, the first one, let's take a look at events. Event objects we are available in Servlet API. Async event. This one is used when we kind of like listening for this one. When you implement for async listener, then you will get an async event. This event that get filed when asynchronous operations initialized on a servlet request has completed, timeout, or produced an error. Because our servlet can be asynchronous, and in Spring Reactive, it actually use servlet, asynchronous servlet. Okay. So far I don't have plan, but I'm interested to provide videos in the future. I only took a look at how the servlet asynchronous is working, but I haven't make any because when we create videos, we have to have a structured knowledge. Okay, so I haven't do that step. So far I don't have plan to create videos for asynchronous, but it's pretty interesting, Next one, HTTP session binding event and HTTP session event. One is work with attribute, the other one is work with HTTP session itself. So some of the articles online, you will see they categorize Servlet Listener API using attribute and using the object itself. In the object means request, session, and servlet context. Okay, each of the object for maintaining the scope, right? So this event is when I set a new attribute, when I remove an attribute from HTTP session scope, then this event gonna be fired. Okay, and HTTP session event are used for the HTTP session itself, which is a life cycle of HTTP session. Suppose we create a new session and we remove we invalidate this session or the session timeout, then for those events gonna be categorized inside the HTTP session event. Okay, same thing, servlet context attribute and the servlet context event, they are a pair, which are very similar to the HTTP session binding event and HTTP session event. Servlet context attribute is when we add an attribute inside the servlet context. When we remove an attribute inside this servlet context, then servlet context attribute event gonna be fired. Servlet context event, this is related to the life cycle of servlet context. Suppose when the servlet context is being created, initialized, and when the servlet context is being destroyed, then all the two events gonna be categorized inside the servlet context. And we have another pair, which is for the request scope. Servlet request event and the servlet request attribute event, same as the other pair. Attribute, when you add an attribute in the request scope, when you remove an attribute from request scope, then this servlet request attribute event will be fired. And the servlet request event, this object is related to the life cycle of servlet request. When a new request comes, okay, when a new request goes to my server side, the container has to create a new request, a new servlet request to that request, right? So the creation of a servlet request object and the destruction of the servlet request object, it's gonna file this servlet request event. So those are events, and those events are used in different listener interface. Okay, so in async listener, which means when we have asynchronous operations inside the servlet request, and you want to do something when an asynchronous operation has been completed, timeout, or has an error, you want to do something there, then you have your own class implement this asynchronous listener. Then you override the methods, okay? And suppose our example at the beginning, okay? I want to have my database connection object ready in servlet context when the application starts, which means before every request, the database connection should be ready. What we can do, we can implement servlet context listener. And when the servlet context, which is a global object, ready, initialized, I will create the connection, database connection. Then I will put the connection inside the servlet context, just right after servlet context is ready. So when we go through filter, when we go to when request passed to filter, when request passed to the servlets, we know that connection is ready. Okay. So suppose you want to listen for the attribute being created in container. Suppose you want to listen for the attribute being added in servlet context global or removed from the servlet context. And if you want to do some callbacks, you can use this servlet context attribute listener. Next one is the servlet request listener and the servlet request attribute listener. One is for the life cycle of a servlet request object. When Tomcat, our container, create servlet request object for a new request. And when we destroy this servlet request object when a request is done, right? So if you want to listen for that, then you can use servlet request listener. From servlet request listener, you can actually get the browser information, the IP address, all those information. And if you want to listen for the events, which is an attribute being added in servlet request scope or removed from a servlet request scope, you can have your own class implement servlet request attribute listener. Okay. And we have others like HTTP session binding listener and HTTP session attribute listener. Okay. This is HTTP session binding listener. This is when we have an object, okay, which bind or unbind from a session. And this is different from this one. We have HTTP session event and we have HTTP session binding event, right? Here, HTTP session remove and set an attribute. So, which is compared to HTTP session binding events, right? This is one. And HTTP session attribute listener, this interface is receive notification when HTTP session attribute changes, okay? It's not set, bind. Bind means set. And unbind is what? Unbind is when we remove. These changes, suppose you change the values. I think this one is when you change the values. That's why it's using binding, okay? And the last one is HTTP session activation listener. So objects are bound to a session. Listener may listen for the container event notified. The session will be passivated, okay, or that is activated, okay, when you create a session, when you destroy a session, like that way. Kind of like a HTTP session life cycle. Because here, HTTP session has 3. Okay, one is for the attribute changes, the other one is a bind, unbind, and HTTP session activation listener is like others, servlet request listener and a servlet context listener. Okay, and this one I have a special name called activation, which is the session will be passivated or the session will be activated. So choose the listener based on your requirement. And for my videos, for my next videos, which a demo I want to show you, probably I will just show you the servlet context listener, because if later on you will study for the Spring framework, like a Spring MVC, and you will know listener is being used, because when we have a Spring project, Spring MVC project, we need to have the configuration files, right? Which means we must ask the Spring to create the objects for us, like controllers, or to do the dependency injection, all the things for us. And you can specify that you will use our listeners to actually read the configuration file, and in the configuration file it will and Spring MVC will based on the configuration file to actually wire our project together. Okay, so servlet context listening is actually very useful, and that's why I only pick that one in next video. Okay, that's it. Thank you for watching this video. See you next time. Bye bye.